Welcome to Beat Diabetes, where we share ways and means to drive the monster of diabetes out of your life. And we share glorious testimonies from people who have done just that. On today's edition, we'll consider a law that makes glucose control so much easier. And we'll also look at the question of centenarians and why it is that most of them eat carbs freely. Coming up. This person says, one thing I was thinking about your test, Dennis, that this might be another area where the small numbers, as Dr. Bernstein always touts, comes into play. He's talking about the blood sugar meter test that I did, showing different meters against each other and against themselves. He says the small numbers that Dr. Bernstein talks about come into play. The lower you can keep your blood sugar, I bet the closer the meter measurements are to each other. In other words, there won't be such a high degree of inaccuracy if the numbers are fairly low. When you start getting into the higher numbers, they can vary much more. Well, I think that's a very astute observation, and I think it's exactly right. The higher your blood sugar is, the more trouble your meter will have being totally accurate. And one way to explain this is, anytime you have something big, the degree of air is going to be multiplied the bigger it is. For example, if I'm a golfer and I can only hit the golf ball 100 yards when I take out my driver, which I can hit a golf ball farther than that, but let's just say I could only hit it 100 yards. And then next to me is Tiger Woods, and he hits the golf ball 300 yards. So I've hit a 100-yard drive. He hits a 300-yard drive. Now, let's say we were both off line, from the center of the fairway by 10%. My 100-yard drive may still be in bounds because 100 yards isn't all that far. But if Tiger Woods is 10% off and he hits it 300 yards, he may be way out of bounds because the farther the ball goes, the more that 10% error is magnified. So, I could brag, well, Tiger Woods and I both hit a drive and I stayed in bounds and he went out of bounds. Yeah, but he hit a 300-yard drive 10% offline. You hit a 100-yard drive 10% offline. So, of course, his ball is going to be much further out of bounds than yours would be, or yours may not be out of bounds. So it's true, essentially, with blood sugar meters, you'll get actually fairly accurate readings if your blood sugar is low. The higher it goes, the more they'll be off. It's true for type 1 diabetics that are trying to match their glucose, their insulin with their meals, because when you eat a high-carb meal, it's so much harder to be accurate and precise, and you can be off one way or the other, and that high carb will just magnify the error. And it's true with type 2 diabetics with how our pancreas can handle blood sugar. Most of us that would be type 2 are type 2 wannabes. In other words, you could easily be a type 2 if you let yourself go, which is how I see myself. My pancreas works well enough, and my metabolic system works well enough that if I eat a meal with, say, 12 grams of carbs, I can usually handle it. I can stay in bounds. I can stay with a peak of maybe 125, 128, something like that. 12 grams of carbs, I can handle it. How do I know that? Well, I've tested myself enough to know that. But if I eat a meal with, say, 40 grams of carbs, I may go way out of bounds and may get a peak well beyond. You might think it'll just match equally all the way down the line, but there is a certain point you can go past and you're in trouble. So again, as Dr. Bernstein talks about the law of small numbers, keep the carbs low, keep the numbers small, type 1 or type 2, it'll make life so much easier and make glucose control so much easier. The law of small numbers. All right, here's an individual who says, I ate 20 dates. Ouch. Dates are about one of the sweetest, highest sugar fruits there is. I ate 20 dates with pleasure, Well, I can believe that. Dates taste good for sure. 20 dates with pleasure. But my blood sugar after 1 hour rose almost to 300. After 2 hours, it was close to normal at 120. So, good news and bad news. The good news is you handled it in 2 hours, and for some people, that's enough. Even though it jumped up to 300 at 1 hour and was back down to 120 at 2 hours, a lot of people would never test at 1 hour, and they'd say, okay, you ate 20 dates, now you're at 120 2 hours later. They don't know what happened at 1 hour, and say, aren't you proud of yourself? You're doing just fine. But jumping up to 300 milligrams per deciliter in one single hour is not at all healthy for you, my friend. You're working that pancreas too hard. And it's like driving a car where you stomp on the gas and it just jerks and takes off, and then you come to a stop and you stomp on the brake, and then you stomp on the gas and you stomp on the brake. Well, you can do it, but that car will wear out much faster. Your pancreas, you just need to be gentle. We need a Be Gentle to Your Pancreas Day, and we need a Be Gentle to Your Pancreas life. So the good news is your pancreas was handling it, and your metabolic system was able to process it in a couple of hours. The bad news is if you can jump up to 300, I don't care what you ate, you've got some issues, and you are not really wise to do that. So I would not do that. All right, this one is from a lady. After the comment I made about how you can live to be old as a diabetic, but you'll have a poor quality of life oftentimes. And so not every diabetic is going to die young. Some can live to be 80, 90, some even to 100. She says, hi from Italy. You're so right. My father died when he was 80, which is, a ripe old age. He was a type 2 diabetic. His last 20 years were not easy. So he made it to 80, but from 60 on, it was rough. She says he had strokes, stents, he took 9 medications daily, dialysis, he was practically blind. But he made it to 80. She says, I don't think anybody would want that. I agree. Who would want that? Alas, diabetes runs in my family, so I've been on a keto diet since 2018 because I don't want to have all these health problems. Now, she says, my blood work is very good, and I feel like my health is in my own hands. Wow, that's beautiful. Not beautiful about what happened to her dad. That's sad. But it's beautiful that she has got the point and is taking remedies to make sure that doesn't happen to her. There are some problems in life we run into we can't do a thing about. It would be nice to say, whatever comes at me, I can fix. But I'm old enough and I've been around long enough to know there are some things in life I can't fix. And of course, as a Christian, what we do is pray. We ask someone who's higher than we are to intervene. But there are some things in life we can fix. If I have a flat tire, I don't sit around and pray for God to do a miracle and heal my tire. I get out and change the tire. And so if there's something you can do about your situation, then by all means do it. And she saw what happened to her dad, who did live to be 80 but had so many problems, and she said, that is not going to happen to me. It reminds me of a verse from the book of Proverbs, which says, a prudent man or woman foresees the evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Well, that's, you say that's not very profound. A wise man, a prudent man, sees some evil ahead, some danger up ahead, coming toward him, and he hides behind a bush, behind a tree, wherever he wants to hide. He hides, but it goes on to say the simple, that is a simple-minded person, someone who's not very sharp, passes on, just goes on right ahead, whistling a happy tune. The simple pass on. They just keep on going, headed straight for the evil. The evil's coming at them. They're coming straight at the evil. The simple pass on, and they are punished. They pay a price. So this lady is a prudent woman. She saw the evil as it was happening in the life of her dad, and she said, not me. And she's gone keto, keeping everything under control, blood sugar in good shape. And she doesn't say so, but I would bet her blood pressure is good as well. Her triglycerides are good as well, because that's always what happens. So she is a prudent woman who hides herself, and the evil just passes right by and never even realizes she was there. And she lives out her years in good health by the grace of God. One more comment. This is also about centenarians, people that live to be 100. They said, well, most centenarians eat carbs. And that's all they said, but I think the implication was, you're saying don't eat carbs, but most people that live to be 100 eat carbs. Well, first of all, I don't say don't eat carbs. I just said don't overdo them. I think our world is overdosing on carbohydrates. I literally believe we are in an overdose mode. Nobody ever ate like we eat today. Nobody ever stuffed themselves with as many carbs and sugars and white flour products and junk food as we do today. So, of course, we're paying a price. As to people that live to be 100, I will admit, most of them, if you interview them, and I've seen a documentary where a number were interviewed, and you ask them, well, what have you eaten all your life? Most of them will say, well, just whatever I wanted. But there are certain things they have in common. Number one, they typically are on the slim side, which means they weren't eating big amounts of food, large portions of food. So even if you eat, a relative amount of carbs, a relatively high, good-sized portion of carbs, I should say, if you don't have big portions, and if you don't have large meals, and you're a slim person, you're not going to get near the carbs somebody else is who's eating the same percentage of foods as you are, but they're eating 3 times as much. So if I take a meal that's 100 carbs, but I break it into 3 pieces, and I just eat a third of that meal, now I'm just eating 33 carbs. Where another person, they eat the whole meal, they're eating 100. And but yeah, and it's true that most centenarians are not low carb, they're not keto. But there was really very little emphasis on diet or health. Most of the 100-year-old people today, as I do this video, were born in 1920. They grew up in the 20s and in the 1930s. And guess what? Nobody was hardly talking about health in those days. It was all you could do to live through the Great Depression in America. And so health was not a big issue. There were no gyms, and people thought it was healthy to drink soda, and Coke would put these ads out of how Coke can give you energy and so forth. So they grew up in that era. So naturally, they've had good genes and healthy bodies, and they've stayed on the slim side. They've been engaged in life, active, typically have a good sense of humor. There are other factors that'll help you live long besides just how you eat. And one of them is simply be engaged in life and be active, and don't just be sluggish. Okay, well, I think that will do it for now. Hope you enjoyed this. If so, give it a thumbs up, and hope you'll subscribe if you haven't yet, and so you can watch all the videos that we make, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. God bless. See you again soon.